So let me talk a bit about that intersection between the child, the family, and the workplace. It is probably one of the most overlooked intersections, yet it is probably the most obvious one when we talk about the rights of the child. But let me be inspired for a moment and channel Her Royal Highness Crown Princess, who made the very important point that as we look at the SDGs, we have to recognize that they are interconnected. It is the totality which is important. It is no different with the Convention of the Child, of the rights of the child. It is all the rights of the child that are important. It is not a checklist. We cannot, as businesses, start out by saying, we will only talk about child labor, and then we will forget about all the other things. Nor can we, as business, take the approach which is, we will seek to eliminate the risk of child labor, because that way of looking at child labor has a particular impact on the actions that you take, because then it becomes more a question about you not getting into trouble than actually ensuring that the rights of the child are respected. That is the first obligation of business. It is to the responsibility of respecting the rights of the child. The second obligation of business is the commitment to support and promote the rights of the child. Those two dimensions are critically important. What we find, however, very often is that to most businesses, but certainly not all, and we've heard great examples here today of those who belong to the not, who do take a holistic approach. But to most businesses, the approach is one which is quite focused on child labor only. And yet, what we find is that eliminating child labor is not feasible without us thinking about the totality of the rights of the child, nor is it feasible unless we start thinking about what is it that it takes for us as businesses to support health, access to health, access to education. How can we think about the rights of the child being respected if the child do not have access to health, if it does not have access to education? And very often the family is the most important connection point for this. There are, in our view, enormous opportunities for business through global supply chains, as Anita referred to before, to advance the rights of the child through the workplace. So it's not only about eliminating child labor, it is advancing the full set of rights of the child through the workplace. And the family is critically important there, because the parents of the child are often workers. They work in factories, they work in farms, they work in office environments, and they work in all different kinds of environments. And having that lens is really important. So let me try and give you an example here. In 2015, we worked with UNICEF to really try and understand what are the full impacts on the rights of the child of the garment sector in Bangladesh. And I don't have to give details on the garment sector in Bangladesh. I think most of you are fairly familiar with that. And of course, to provide recommendations to business, what is it that you can do as business to reduce the negatives and enhance the positives? And what our research identified was a few really critical areas. And let me just take them very quickly. So in addition, of course, the risk of child labor, there were 4 or other key areas that really popped out. One is maternity protection. A second is daycare facilities. A third is mother health, nutrition, and safety. And a fourth one is wages and hours. And I wonder how many of us, as we think about the rights of the child in global supply chains, in factories in Bangladesh, or wherever they are, have those 4 dimensions up in front as we think about what is it that we can do as business to prevent the violation of the rights of the child, including, of course, child labor. We also looked at broadly, what about the community? Because obviously factories and farms are not isolated islands. They are indeed part and parcel of a community. They are influenced by the community in which they're in, and they influences the community in which they are in. And what we also saw there was it's important to work on a dimension such as early childhood development and education. And obviously also start thinking about living conditions and more broadly, as I mentioned before, access to services. So if you take mother health, nutrition, and safety, the health of the mother is obviously essential for the unborn child. It is obviously essential to the infant, but is also essential to the toddler and to the teenager, because without the mother having access to health services, it is very unlikely that her children will have access to health services. And that access very often happens via factory clinics, or it happens via clinics that are in the immediate neighborhood of the factories. And the factories have opportunities for making connections between its workers and the factories. The clinics. What we have found very often is that many of these clinics are closed when the workers no longer work. So they actually cannot access the clinics. So there's something there to work on. If you think of wages and hours, it's an obvious one. Income is everything. If you do not have income, you cannot afford to send your children to healthcare facilities, unless that they are publicly paid, which they often are not. You cannot afford having them in school, maybe because they do need to work to support you. So wages of the workers is essential to the rights of the child. It is not just a question about the workers themselves. And long working hours, of course, and working hours in general is important for children. It's important to parental care and what you as a parent can do for your children. In some places in China, for instance, it is mandated by law that the mother has 1 hour of breastfeeding time per day. Yet in most cases, that is not respected, which of course has a tremendous impact on the child, because the mother needs to do her full 8, 10, 12 hours. So these things are essential. So as we think about the rights of the child, we need to think about the well-being of the family, and the family as individuals, the mother, also the father, but the mother is obviously essential. And we need to think about it as a whole. So what this means is, and this is how we look at it when we work with business on advancing the rights of the child or advancing human rights more broadly, is that business need to think in terms of having a holistic approach. It is this point that Her Royal Highness the Crown Prince has made about the totality, the interconnectedness of the SDGs, and in this case, the interconnectedness of the rights of the child. So having that holistic approach is what really in some ways guarantees you understand the full picture and understand, why is there a problem here? Well, that is because there's a problem here, or there's one there, or there's one there. The second point we usually make is be strategic about it. Do not treat it as a pet project on the side. Be strategic. And I think the way that Mats Randrich spoke about it is that for many mobile operators, this is strategic. They are integrated into their business. And that's my third point. It needs to be integrated. So once it's integrated, you use the full power of business. The full power of business is not the cash that sits on shelves. It's the distribution networks, it's the knowledge base, it's the products, it's the services. That's the power of business that we need to mobilize. And we can mobilize business of power in 3 different ways. Business can do things that it controls. It can direct its marketing, its procurement, all of these things. It can also enable others to do good. It can fund women's organizations. It can work with its supply base to help them do better. And thirdly, business can influence. Business can influence through advocacy. Speak up on the rights of the child. Say it's important with access to healthcare. Say it's important with education, locally in the producing communities and wherever they are. The corporate responsibility to respect the rights of the child in many ways goes through the corporate commitment to support the well-being of the child. That connectedness is important. These are inseparable, and as much as the child and the family are inseparable. Thank you so much.